Oh, this is juicy, juicy. So juicy, I said it twice. You're getting a 2-in-1 video. Hello, my fam. It is Perez, the queen of all media, the original influencer, journalist, podcaster, and your number one source for everything It Ends With Us saga. We will be talking about Justin Baldoni's just filed response to actress Isabella Ferrer's explosive filing from over the weekend. I told you, remember? She played young Lily Bloom in It Ends With Us, and she accused Baldoni of harassment. And even though she was fine being subpoenaed by Subpoena Serena, she didn't want to be subpoenaed by him. She was fighting tooth and nail to stop that from happening. But before we get to that, and it's juicy, Team Baldoni Wayfarer also just filed an opposition to Anna Kendrick's two-time co-star, her request for sanctions and to revoke his lead attorney, Brian Friedman's ability to represent him in the Southern District of New York. Before I even get to the beginning of that, though, it's obvious by this point, all the parties freaking hate each other. Loathe. Baldoni Wayfarer start off saying, in her latest effort to curtail opposing counsel Brian Friedman's speech and chill his ability to effectively defend his clients, plaintiff Blake Lively now seeks a laundry list of sanctions under Rule 3.6 of the New York Rules of Professional Conduct. However, Baldoni Wayfarer argue a lawyer has a right, indeed, an obligation to defend his or her client even in the press. And Lively's lapdog, Lyman, has not issued a gag order in this case. Yet. Miss Lively contends that Rule 3.6 of how lawyers should behave professionally applies because Mr. Friedman's statements challenge her character, credibility, or reputation. Miss Lively misconstrues Rule 3.6, which does not bar public statements by counsel, even statements critical of an opposing party. Rule 3.6 bars only those statements that create a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing an adjudicative proceeding in the matter. The chief failing in Miss Lively's motion is the underlying assumption that any statement that touches on a party's character, credibility, or reputation automatically triggers a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing an adjudicative proceeding in the matter, and therefore violates Rule 3.6. This is not the case. Nevertheless, Miss Lively glosses over the threshold requirement for Rule 3.6 sanctions, which is that the negative publicity creates a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing the adjudicative proceedings. Miss Lively, they're complimenting her lawyers now. Miss Lively deftly sidesteps this requirement with the single conclusory statement that this court should impose sanctions here because Mr. Friedman's statements pose a significant risk of tainting the jury pool with deceptive, corrosive, and untrue statements cloaked with an illusion of lawyerly integrity. But, they counter, Miss Lively does not argue, much less provide any evidence that Mr. Friedman's statements are likely to taint the jury, because they won't. because a jury person is able to make up their own minds. And they have the obligation to enter the trial and their time on the jury without any propensity to rule in either way. Instead of enlightening on the risk of potential prejudice, Miss Lively myopically focuses on whether Mr. Friedman's comments relate to Miss Lively's credibility, character, or reputation, which may ordinarily create a prejudice, an analysis that is unnecessary, absent a showing of a substantial risk of materially prejudicing the adjudicative process. Miss Lively's failure to demonstrate a substantial risk of material prejudice alone dooms Miss Lively's latest request for sanctions against opposing counsel. Yes, latest. She has already filed for sanctions, and they have not been granted. I, too, have filed for sanctions against her counsel, and they have not been granted. And the Baldoni Wayfarer team also argue, even assuming that Miss Lively's silence, her silence as to how exactly Brian Friedman's statements would prejudice a potential jury, even assuming her silence is sufficient to establish a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing an adjudicative proceeding flowing from any statement made by Mr. Friedman, the cited statements fall under Rule 3.6's explicit exceptions, including, among others, the exception for statements a reasonable lawyer would believe are required to protect a client from the substantial prejudicial effect of recent publicity not initiated by the lawyer or the lawyer's client, which is necessary to mitigate the recent adverse publicity. That makes sense. I love this because this response has bite to it. They say, in this vein, Miss Lively conveniently ignores her own counsel's very public campaign to savage defendants and their counsel in the public eye. Miss Lively similarly ignores that she was a highly divisive figure long before Mr. Friedman came on the scene. Boom! Fact. Mic drop. Discord on the It Ends With Us set attracted media attention while the film was still in production. Public and media interest spiked when Miss Lively encouraged cast and crew members to defriend or unfollow Mr. Baldoni on social media, froze Mr. Baldoni out of the marketing campaign for the film he produced, directed, and starred in, and banished him and his family to the basement at the film's premiere in August 2024, long before Mr. Friedman was engaged in late December 2024. Y'all, you know why it's important for me, at least, to read everything and understand everything and keep everything in here that I've digested? Because you never know what you're going to learn in which filing. And this one, I feel like, is telegraphing a lot of what we can expect to hear from Team Baldoni Wayfarer if and when this actually goes to trial. This is such a foreshadowing. Miss Lively herself poured fuel on the fire when she and or her counsel provided a draft of her CRD complaint to the New York Times before it was filed. Miss Lively's post-litigation conduct has done nothing to endear her to the public, the press, or content creators. Oh, this is so good! A recent barrage of subpoenas has angered and alienated those already critical of Miss Lively, forcing a number of them to seek this court's intervention. I am one of those numbers. And there is a delicious footnote there that says, to the best of the Wayfarer party's knowledge, the subpoenas have failed to yield any evidence of manipulation or interference by Mr. Friedman. Blissfully tone-deaf to her own conduct, Miss Lively is not only unwilling to accept that her own celebrity and actions have generated the media frenzy she now complains of and the weight of negative publicity against her. She conveniently ignores that she and her counsel have been less than shy about publicly bashing Mr. Friedman and the Wayfarer defendants in the press. Nevertheless, Miss Lively seeks monetary sanctions, attorney's fees, a reprimand, and revocation of Mr. Friedman's pro-hack vice admission for statements primarily relating to whether Miss Lively would appear at deposition and the falsity of her claims. This is one of the best filings thus far. Mwah, chef's kiss. Done so well. In short, Rule 3.6 does not, as Miss Lively urges, render any public statement by a lawyer sanctionable, while statements that relate to a party's character, credibility, or reputation may be ordinarily likely to create prejudice. The statements must also create a substantial risk of materially prejudicing the adjudicative proceedings. In other words, ordinarily does not translate to absolutely. And the fact that a statement may relate to a party's character, credibility, or reputation does not abrogate the requirement that there be a substantial risk of material prejudice to the adjudicative proceeding. Therefore, Miss Lively's motion should be denied because Miss Lively fails to show that Mr. Friedman's statements raised a substantial risk. The statements identified by Miss Lively fall into Rule 3.6's express exceptions, and they're all good. I'm trying not to read everything because, there's a lot of repetition. Oh my freaking God! Oh my God! Oh my God! This next line is so savage. My taint hurts. Kevin Fritz, I think, is the author of this. Maybe it was a team effort. I'm going to assume it was a team effort. Somebody on Team Baldoni Wayfarer brilliantly wrote, quote, Miss Lively is a celebrity who, for whatever reason, has long been a magnet for media attention. I got to read that one again because I got to do it justice. Miss Lively is a celebrity who, for whatever reason, has long been a magnet for media attention. They then rehash the whole, there was already drama before Brian Friedman came along. Here's a juicy bit. After the film's release, this motion is the latest salvo in Miss Lively's relentless war against Mr. Friedman. Pause. There's a footnote that says, on August 8th, 2025, this court wisely issued a long overdue order advising all individuals filing documents in this case not to make submissions using language that is disrespectful to the parties, their counsel, or the court. The Wayfarer parties are hopeful that all parties will comply with this order and cease from the incessant personal attacks on counsel. Meaning Team Caca versus them. And they also argue that this motion comes on the heels of a string of motions calculated to intimidate counsel and curb Mr. Friedman's statements in defense of his clients. They bring up the fact that they've already filed a request for sanctions and even subpoenaed Brian Friedman and his law firm, which is unusual to subpoena opposing counsel. But this is not all. Miss Lively sought to bar Mr. Friedman from taking Miss Lively's deposition and has repeatedly added gratuitous swipes at Mr. Friedman in a string of motions unrelated to the negative publicity which Miss Lively alleges smeared her. They then list all of these instances which La Rubia Diabolica claims smeared her, none of which, in my opinion, smear her. For example, they take issue with Brian Friedman saying that Miss Lively's amended complaint includes claims that are false, filled with unsubstantial hearsay of unnamed persons who are clearly no longer willing to come forward or publicly support her, and lacking actual evidence, as documents do not lie and people do. That's defamatory? In what world? Or they took issue with this statement where Brian Friedman said that, quote, Miss Lively was attempting to divert the public's attention from the receipts, the actual documents, video footage, and additional evidence. All right, I'm not even going to read any more of these defamatory statements. Let's keep it moving. Miss Lively's motion should be denied. They argue that a lawyer is not barred from speaking to the press, as they already mentioned. Miss Lively fails to present any evidence of a substantial likelihood of materially prejudicing the adjudicative proceeding in this matter. They really go into that. And also, Brian Friedman is allowed to talk to the press and defend his client and himself, because that is expressly allowed in Rule 3.6's exceptions. And not only that, they were reasonably required to protect the Wayfarer parties by countering the substantial prejudicial effect of recent publicity initiated by Miss Lively and her counsel. Oh, I love this. This is so well played. They quote lying Lyman to himself. Lively's lapdog says, clients do have a right to have their attorneys speak to members of the press, particularly in a high-profile case, and give their interpretation. The public has an interest in that also. I wouldn't begrudge you speaking to members of the press, and I'm not going to begrudge any of his lawyers doing that either. Y'all, this judge is hating his life. He is hating this. He's never had to deal with a drama quite like this saga before. They then cite all the smack talk that her lawyers have done against Baldoni's lead attorney, Brian Friedman. Basically tit for tat. However, whereas the second wife of Ryan Reynolds took umbrage with 10 statements made by Brian Friedman, the Baldoni Wayfarer parties have listed over 15 statements that La Rubia Diabolica's lawyers have made. You're mad? Well, we're madder, and we've got receipts. I live for this. And this is one of the best conclusions. This filing is a work of art. In summation, apparently no punishment for a perceived slight would be too draconian for Miss Lively. In her extended quest to permanently silence Mr. Friedman, in addition to monetary sanctions, attorney's fees, and a reprimand, Miss Lively seeks to have the court revoke Mr. Friedman's pro-hack vice status. Oh my God, I just coughed up a lung. We're back. Blah, 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 blah. Revoke Mr. Friedman's pro-hack vice status, effectively disqualifying him as the Wayfarer defendant's counsel. The court should decline to exercise its power to sanction Mr. Friedman, implicitly recognizing shortcomings in its quest for Rule 3.6 sanctions. Miss Lively alternatively asks the court to exercise its inherent power to sanction opposing counsel. The court should decline to do so. Sanctions under the court's inherent power require a showing of bad faith. Miss Lively has not shown the bad faith conduct required for sanctions under the court's inherent power. For the foregoing reasons, Mr. Friedman and the Wayfarer defendants respectfully request that the court enter an order denying Miss Lively's motion for sanctions. Cosign. I told you you were in for a doozy with this video, and now we move on to the explosive response to Isabella Ferrer's equally explosive filing, asking Judge Slimy to deny their request for alternative service against young Lily Bloom. They were talking to her lawyer, but the Baldoni Wayfarer parties argue that Isabella's lawyer stopped being responsive. They were hoping that her attorney would accept service on her behalf, and that did not happen. So they now inform the judge, we, the Baldoni Wayfarer parties, write in response to Isabella Ferrer's opposition to the Wayfarer party's motion to serve her by alternative means for the pendency of this action. The opposition is primarily an inappropriate attack upon Mr. Baldoni and his counsel, in violation of the order dated August 8th, 2025, which they just referenced in the opposition for sanctions and which I just told you about. They say that that is relating to matters not before the court, i.e. indemnification, and irrelevant to whether Miss Ferrer should be served via alternative means. She should. Miss Ferrer played the role of young Lily Bloom in the film It Ends With Us. After Miss Ferrer completed her work on the film, she expressed her gratitude to Mr. Baldoni, stating that she had an incredible experience and praised him for creating a comfortable, safe space for her. Rule 26A.1 requires parties to disclose the identity of each individual likely to have discoverable information, along with the subjects of that information that the disclosing party may use to support its claims or defenses. According to Miss Lively's amended initial disclosures, then this part is redacted, but it's pretty obvious that the redacted part mentions that the Swift repellent disclosed that she believed Isabella Ferrer had relevant information. That's why La Lively filed a subpoena on young Lily Bloom. And will you look at this right here in the next paragraph? I was not even reading ahead. This is after I had to scroll, and after the redacted part, it says, in February 2025, Miss Lively issued a subpoena to Miss Ferrer, who was represented by Mr. Michelman. Presumably, Mr. Michelman accepted service of the subpoena on Miss Ferrer's behalf without objection. In July 2025, the Wayfarer parties subpoenaed Miss Ferrer for documents that she either, I knew it, that she either neglected to produce or were not requested by Miss Lively's subpoena. It got escandaloso. This got so good. The Wayfarer parties twice requested that Mr. Michelman, Isabella's lawyer, accept service of their subpoena, a common professional courtesy that Mr. Michelman likely granted Miss Lively's counsel in connection with her subpoena. They're in codes, I think. My opinion is that. Mr. Michelman ignored the Wayfarer party's requests. Instead, Mr. Michelman prepared and filed a robust opposition to the motion for alternative service, most of which does not pertain to service, without explaining why he refused to accept service of the Wayfarer party's subpoena or why his client is so reticent to testify. Mr. Michelman seems more focused on It Ends With Us movie's purported contractual obligation to indemnify Miss Ferrer and cover his fees. Ironically, Mr. Michelman's actions have unnecessarily increased those fees by creating issues where none should exist. With respect to service, Miss Ferrer's opposition suggests that the Wayfarer parties were not diligent in their efforts to serve her, but should have reached out to Miss Ferrer's talent agent or conducted a skip trace. Naturally, we deemed Miss Ferrer's counsel and not her talent agent as the appropriate person with whom to communicate concerning the subpoena. Yeah, that seems pretty logical for even a non-lawyer. As for the latter, we assure the court that the two addresses at which service of the subpoena was attempted were not derived out of thin air. We are happy to share the results of our due diligence with the court, albeit that seems unnecessary given that Miss Ferrer has counsel who has now appeared. Oh, good one. The opposition alleges that in attempting personal service after her lawyer refused to accept service on her behalf, Mr. Baldoni is harassing Miss Ferrer and attempting to draw her deeper into litigation and disputes that she has done her best to avoid. This is, this is so good. It was not the Wayfarer parties who first subpoenaed Miss Ferrer. It was Miss Lively. And again, Mr. Michelman appears to have accepted service of her subpoena without objection. Miss Lively should not be permitted to obtain discovery from Miss Ferrer while Miss Ferrer and her counsel frustrate all effort by the Wayfarer parties to obtain the discovery critical to the preparation of their defense. Given the circumstances, the Wayfarer parties are willing to stipulate that none of the parties will use, plot twist. This is why you read everything. This is why you watch my videos. Wow. Given the circumstances, the Wayfarer parties are willing to stipulate that none of the parties will use any communication to, from, or concerning Miss Ferrer or any testimony from her in any manner in this action. Whoa. This is mind-blowing. This is a game changer. Why? Because Isabella Ferrer's testimony would have been very advantageous to Justin Baldoni. However, if they're saying they're not needing, they're willing to wave that away, Team Baldoni Wayfarer must feel very confident in their defense. Oh God, I'm scared. I hope. Oh my brain is exploding, imploding, melting, crying. My brain is being squeezed. This is wow. That stipulation will satisfy Miss Ferrer's apparent desire to avoid involvement in the litigation and trial. Now they're putting the onus on the up-and-coming editor and self-appointed fashionista. If the other parties decline to enter into such a stipulation, and Miss Ferrer and her counsel continue to resist service, the court should enter an order excluding, they're throwing it to the court as well, excluding Miss Ferrer as a witness and excluding the use of any communication to, from, or concerning Miss Ferrer in any manner in this action. Finally, this is so epic and crazy. Oh my God. Honestly, this is better than any fiction. No soap opera, telenovela, nothing holds a candle to the It Ends With Us saga. Finally, to the extent that Miss Ferrer believes that the Wayfarer subpoena is overbroad or otherwise objectionable, which it is not, she is entitled to serve formal objections thereto once the service issue has been resolved. A point that dispels any ludicrous notion of a quid pro quo in connection with the subpoena. This is masterful. For the reasons set forth above, as well as those contained in the Wayfarer party's initial papers, the Wayfarer party's motion to serve Miss Ferrer via alternative means for the pendency of this action should be granted. There's also a delicious footnote here that says, in inflammatory fashion, the opposition, Miss Ferrer's lawyer, uses the word harass over a dozen times. Because it was a smear attempt, I think, is my opinion. I need to take a Tylenol or an Advil or something because my head, oh my God. Oh my God. Everything, this video. Wow. Masterful. And crazy. And I'm at a loss for words right now, but hopefully you are not. All right, my fam, thoughts on everything? Let's discuss it all in the comment section.